Welcome everyone to a special ARG UK seminar on local nature recovery strategies, a new initiative for nature recovery. A fantastic panel of speakers. I went to a seminar organised by Bruce Winney and Natural England about a month or so ago, and this was the first I'd heard about these local nature recovery strategies, and I thought this is something that really works with our local groups. It takes it back to the local level, which is where we excel, of course. So they very kindly offered to come and do a special session on amphibians and reptiles, and where we could actually ask questions that were pertinent to us. So like an opportunity we couldn't pass up. So I'm pleased to welcome tonight, we have Katie Finkill-Coombs, who's a senior advisor for the Nature and Partnerships Cheshire, Greater Manchester, Merseyside and Lancashire area team. This is a pretty big area, from Natural England. Then we will have Bruce Winney, who's the policy officer from the Wildlife and Countryside Link. And then because we're ARG UK, we're having Mike Brown, who's chair of the North Merseyside Amphibian and Reptile Group. And he's going to talk about the issues that their group encounters in conserving their local amphibians and reptiles. And then hopefully Katie and Bruce will be able to make encouraging comments and suggest how we could all work together. And then following that, there'll be a discussion. Susie Collinson, one of our trustees, who's also chair of Cumbria Amphibian and Reptile Group, is going to be taking questions from the chat. So I'm going to hand over to Katie. Are you there, Katie?
I am. Thank you, Angela.
Sharing.
Brill. So thank you very much. I'm Katie Finkill-Coombs from Natural England. I'm a senior advisor working on local nature recovery strategies, and I'm specifically covering Lancashire and also the Liverpool City region. So thank you for inviting me to this evening's session and for this opportunity to tell you all about local nature recovery strategies, what they are, their aims and their ambition. So we're really excited about these new strategies and how they can help nature's recovery. So without further ado, I'll make a start. So the Environment Act captures the requirements for local nature recovery strategies in the 25-year plan, where one of the aims of the Act includes the delivery of the nature recovery network for England through local nature recovery strategies. The Environment Act also includes specific targets to halt the decline in species by 2030 and to increase species abundance by at least 10% by 2042 compared to 2030 levels. Achieving these targets will be challenging, but strategic tools such as local nature recovery strategies will help to create new habitats to benefit a wide range of species as well as to the wider environment. The LNRS strategies are an ambitious and strategic tool for nature recovery established by England's Environment Act, and they will help to underpin and deliver the nature recovery network. Natural England sees these as a new and exciting tool to help identify ambitious nature recovery opportunities across a landscape scale. So this presentation will showcase how the pilot LNRS strategies help to identify a six-step process to deliver a biodiversity statement of priorities and a local habitat map. So what are they? The core purpose of LNRSs is to help reverse the ongoing decline in biodiversity and nature. The strategies will help restore and link up habitats so that species can thrive. And this process will ensure that local partners collaborate to agree the best places to help local nature recovery. Natural England has a leading role in supporting responsible authorities to achieve the purpose and aims of LNRS. The strategies are designed as a tool to drive more coordinated, practical and focused action to deliver a bigger, better and more joined up nature recovery network across the whole of England, and these strategies will be split up into roughly 50 areas, often likely to be at county level in size. The LNRSs will come mandatory in April 2022, and the aim is to have these strategies ready for the end of 2023 to inform the rollout of Biodiversity Net Gain. This time frame, however, does not include final sign-off of each strategy. Each strategy will enable partners, local partners, to deliver 3 objectives for the area that it covers. by mapping the most valuable existing habitats for nature, mapping specific proposals for creating or improving local habitats, both for nature, species, and the wider environment, and also coordinating agreement of the local priorities for nature's recovery. The detailed locations and potential management interventions are identified during the later stage of the process. So the key principles of LNRSs is that they will be a mechanism for mapping and planning the local delivery of the nature recovery network and support the delivery of biodiversity net gain. So the Environment Act, in addition to establishing LNRSs, will also make delivering biodiversity net gain a mandatory part of nature recovery. Now, a really key and important principles of LNRS is that they must be locally led, evidence-based and co-produced. So they bring together communities and decision makers across the private, public and voluntary sector to prioritise action for biodiversity. As I mentioned, there will be a responsible authority that will lead on each strategy. However, stakeholders, partners and local communities will all feed into the strategy to create a shared plan for nature recovery. They also must be collaboratively produced, with the forthcoming regulations under the Environment Act providing a key mechanism for setting minimum standards for how responsible authorities must work with local partners. We're also hoping that LNRS should consider opportunities to achieve wider nature-based solutions, and the potential opportunities identified in these strategies can include actions to address other environmental objectives that are also positive for biodiversity. For example, river flood management and climate change mitigation through tree planting and peatland restoration. Another ambition is for LNRSs to try and align effort, for example, to help target the location of green infrastructure through local plans. And they should also guide and inform other spatial plans within the area, for example, the AUMB and National Park Management Plans. The strategy should be seen as a useful and practical tool by landowners, managers, developers, local authorities and communities. They can direct investments such as biodiversity net gain or carbon credits and help partners to deliver their nature recovery objectives effectively. Both DEFRA and Natural England are currently exploring how these strategies can be delivered on the ground and how they can align with funding sources such as the new Environmental Land Management Scheme or ELMS and also biodiversity net gain. So as I mentioned, there will be two outputs of LNRS. One is the biodiversity statement of priorities, and the second is the production of a local habitat map. Now, these are two examples of the biodiversity statement of priorities that are taken from the 5 pilot schemes which ran in 2020. The biodiversity statement of priorities must include an overall description of the area, drawing on existing policies, strategies, and planning documents, a description of the ecological sub-areas based on the key habitats and species associated with the area, and also opportunities for linking, increasing, or improving the condition of each key habitat. There should also be a description for which the creation or improvement of habitats could help provide a wider nature-based solution, such as climate and flood mitigation, and then the agreed outcomes that each LNRS will achieve, as well as the potential measures and mechanisms to deliver the desired outcomes. The second output is the local habitat map, and this map supports local action by mapping important existing habitats and further informing, linking, increasing or improving the condition of the key habitats. This map is the foundation of the LNRS and will be used for identifying areas to expand, improve and create better networks based on the Lawton principles. So this is when using local data from local partners and communities and partnerships will be really, really helpful and important for informing these maps. The map is created based on local evidence and will involve all partners and stakeholders. It will map the most valuable existing habitats and species for nature. And then this is overlaid with specific proposals for creating or improving habitat for nature and achieving wider environmental goals. It must also identify proposed locations for delivering both the prioritised and other desired outcomes and measures. So these are two examples, again, taken from the pilots. So the map on the left demonstrates where Cumbria have mapped linkages to create new upland heath to help link and connect isolated, fragmented patches of upland heath. And on the right here is Greater Manchester, mapping all the opportunities for grassland and heathland creation and restoration. So as I mentioned, the pilots followed a six-step process. And this is the graphic on the right-hand side, shows that the process that they followed. Steps 0 to 3 is when the local data from partners and communities help to identify potential opportunities to create and restore habitats, which will also benefit species and the wider environment. Step 0 is when DEFRA helps. They provide a map data to each LNRS, which includes the habitats and conservation sites. And then step 1 is when the local data is added. Step 2 is description of the LNS a description of LNRS area is created, including key habitats, species, and potential opportunities to restore and create new habitats based on the ecological subareas. Step 3 is the identification of outcomes achieved through creation or improving the habitat and categorizing these outcomes into priority or other. And then step 4 is potential measures established for creating or improving sites to achieve priorities, and this helps inform the biodiversity statement of priorities. Step 5 is mapping suitable locations for delivery of potential measures onto a map, which will then help to reduce the local habitat map. The pilots were managed by Natural England in conjunction with local authorities. And there's just on the left-hand side here is a summary of the lessons learned, which includes clear leadership and transparency from the responsible authority was crucial in getting others included from the outset. And establishing clear governance structure was really important. All the pilots had a pilot area team, which included DEFRA bodies, national parks, AUMBs, local planning authorities, and local nature partnerships. With regard to engagement, there cannot be a one-size-fits-all, since different stakeholders need to be collaborative differently according to their capacity and needs. In particular, recognition of land managers' role as stakeholders and key delivery partners is essential. And then in terms of data and evidence, the data needs to be accessible enough to empower non-specialists to make informed suggestions about what their priorities are. And we need to make sure that there aren't any data licensing issues. So all the data inputted as LNRS needs to be open data. This slide just provides an example of the structure and governance from the Cumbria pilot, and they mapped out all their partners and their involvement levels alongside the process steps outlined earlier. The structure followed a 3-tier structure. Land management and land manager input was really important, and they need to be engaged with early. And it was also important to engage with different stakeholders, difficult stakeholders right from the beginning. Although this can be tricky and they may undermine the process, you can address these discussions right at the beginning and save issues further down the line. They also had working groups. So the pilot area team worked on the mapping, and then they had a working group on developing the statement of biodiversity priorities. In terms of Natural England's role, I am a senior advisor within Natural England working on local nature recovery strategies, and my main role is to support the responsible authority to establish local nature recovery strategy partnerships in the local area. So I am working with the responsible authority in Lancashire, so that's Lancs County Council, and then also the Liverpool Combined Authority as the responsible authority for the Liverpool City Region LNRS. My role will also, I will also be the first point of contact for partner agencies, with the expertise available from colleagues across Natural England's Cheshire to Lancashire area team. I will also provide advice on the implementation of the regulations and guidance as directed by DEFRA and through liaison with the National Natural England team. I'm also having regular catch-up with relevant colleagues in the Environment Agency and the Forestry Commission to ensure we're all aligning national and local priorities. I was closely working with my fellow senior advisors working on local nature recovery strategies in neighbouring areas such as Cumbria, Greater Manchester and Cheshire to ensure joint outcomes and the delivery of the wider nature recovery network. And this will support a nationally consistent approach to the LNRS development. As part of a national training, the senior advisors within Natural England are undergoing extensive training on both technical and leadership modules to ensure we have the skills to negotiate and resolve any issues that may arise, and that where the situation may require it, we can act as a responsible authority if required. The following slides just provide further information on the regs and guidance, which will be published by DEFRA. This is still being drafted, and we're hoping it will be published later on in the year. This slide, so the levels in 2 to 7 in the grey box, excuse me, are key areas currently under development. So obviously there's far more grey on this slide than we were hoped, but it just sets out how the Environment Act acts as a legal framework for the creation of LNRSs. The regulations will set out the process by which LNRSs are prepared, and the responsible authority will have to follow this process. And the statutory guidance will set out greater detail what an LNRS should contain. The responsible authorities will have to have regard to this guidance, and this may or may not contain DEFRA's national policy steer, depending on the ministerial decision. The national habitat map will be provided by DEFRA, and this will provide like a baseline map. Some of this information is subjective from the Secretary of States about the areas that are or could be of importance biodiversity. And then there may be additional non-statutory guidance to provide more detailed information on particular aspects of the LNRS or their preparation. The forthcoming regulations, due to be published later this year, will address a range of activities on this slide. There is some further clarification required around the sign-off process, and the requirements at this stage in the regulations are under development. This will need to reflect the range of circumstances that each LNRS may face in terms of likely governance and structures. In terms of guidance and content, this slide shows a range of issues that the forthcoming guidance will address. These include the processes required under LNRS preparation and the steps required to deliver those processes. There are also a range of other matters that may be addressed, and these are outlined on this slide. At this stage, we're not able to confirm whether this information will be categorically in the guidance coming later this year. But the lessons learned from the pilots are informing what is being considered by DEFRA for inclusion in the guidance. And then just the last few slides here. This slide outlines an exhaustive list of potential measures to help encourage the local nature recovery strategy. So there is the mandatory 10% biodiversity net gain. An uplift in the calculation of biodiversity units provides an incentive to focus on sites identified by the local nature recovery strategies. There's also a new strengthened duty on public authorities to conserve and enhance biodiversity, and which includes a requirement to have regard to the relevant local nature recovery strategies. And the Environment Act commits government to provide guidance to explain LNRS's role in planning and how it aligns with the existing planning system. The strategies are expected to play a role in the spatial prioritisation of the local nature recovery scheme, part of the Environmental Land Management Future Scheme. And there are several funding streams, such as the peat strategy and the tree strategy through the Nature of Climate for Climate Fund, which will also help to deliver LNRSs on the ground. Lastly, there's the Flood Resilience Fund, working with local flood authorities to deliver natural flood management and coastal realignment. So this slide, it just sort of summarises what LNRSs are not. They are not a delivery plan. Instead, they are mechanisms through which other measures and interventions may be delivered as outlined previously. LNRSs are non-binding, so responsible authorities must prepare an LNRS, but they are not required to deliver the opportunities identified. However, the Environment Act does require that LNRSs are reviewed and republished, and this will enable progress on delivery to be monitored and to reflect on what has been achieved. LNRSs are not lines on a map that can confer any level of protection or prevent land uses such as intensive farming or development. And LNRS habitat maps are an opportunity maps that will guide and inform planning and nature recovery activities. Lastly, LNRSs do not give permission to create habitat without consulting specialists in historic environment, historic environment, landscape access, for example. The penultimate slide, a quick update on where we are currently. So DEFRA have confirmed provisional appointment of responsible authorities for nearly all of the 50 LNRSs. These will be formally approved and agreed once the regulation guidance have been finalised and the funding confirmed. And the Natural England senior advisors are continuing to have conversations to support responsible authorities and also engage with different partners, local communities and volunteers to ensure they understand the LNRS, the concept, and they're ready for the rollout from April onwards. So my last slide just provides sort of a time frame of where we are. So the training that the Natural England advisors start in January, and that's about to come to an end. This training will be rolled out again to responsible authorities and also key partners to ensure that they have the expertise to develop their strategies. There's also going to be an external LNRS network. So this will be more of a virtual online platform. So where an opportunity for responsible authorities and partners to ask key questions and to share what's working and what's not working, and basically just to act as a support network. As I mentioned, the responsible authority have been provisionally appointed. And then the statutory regs and guidance, we're still waiting for those to be published by DEFRA, and that will also, alongside the funding, will also be confirmed. So that's everything from me. I've got any questions slide, but I understand that we might be taking questions at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Katie. That's a comprehensive overview of quite a complicated process and very new to us, so it's really helpful. I can see several questions in the chat. Maybe Susie, could you just bring some of those questions forward for Katie now?
What happens to local biodiversity action plans once a LNRS is published? How do the BAPs and the LNRSs work together?
So we're hoping that all the sort of existing data out there in terms of plans and strategies will all help inform the LNRS. So this is sort of really useful information that's already been put together, so we don't want to lose it. We're hoping that once we get to that sort of stage where we're identifying opportunities for habitat creation and restoration, these biodiversity action plans will help inform the LNRS. So they'll sort of be integrated into the local nature recovery strategy. And then so the ambition is to have sort of joint outcomes.
Can I just pop in there and say what will not happen is just relabeling BAPs and LNRS. That's absolutely not going to happen.
No, so that was one of my slides, that said LNRSs are not biodiversity action plans. They are more strategic to show where habitat could happen. So they're not definitive lines on a map. It's more that kind of in this area, using local knowledge, we have identified that this habitat network is the best place to be created or restored.
We might have lost Susie.
Yeah, I lost sound then, sorry.
You're back, lovely.
I'm back now. Told you we need better internet coverage. What else have we got? What sanctions are there for local authorities that fail to get the 10% net gain?
So biodiversity net gain, so that that guidance is also being developed by DEFRA, so we don't know what the if there's any kind of enforcement, but I'm sure there will be. So although Biodiversity Net Gain is very closely linked to LNRSs, it's not something that I'm particularly I don't know the details and the ins and outs of Biodiversity Net Gain, so I can only answer in terms of sort of local nature recovery strategies, I'm afraid.
Thank you. Yes, there's one. How can the LNRS become mandatory before the publication of the regulations that establish when parts of the Environment Act come into force?
So we're waiting for the regulation and guidance will tell us all the information about what it specifically needs to contain, how we need to incorporate species data, how we need to work with neighbouring partners. So we can't really sort of publish the LNRS until we have that data, that information. So we're waiting on the regs and guidance before we can really get going with the LNRS. But what we can do right now is we know we have to produce the biodiversity statement of priorities. We know we need to do a local habitat map. So at the moment, while we're waiting for the regs and guidance to be released, we are looking at what existing data we have out there. So we're talking to different partners and stakeholders and really interested to see if they've done any mapping to date and what data they hold. And this is all all really useful stuff to help inform the LNRS.
Perhaps another way to think about it is the Environment Act said that responsible authorities will be mandated to set up LNRS. And there's a certain time after that that actually the Act says in fact that it starts. But what we're now waiting for is the guidance and regulations. So the rollout, the actual practical rollout of what's going to happen. Yeah. It's going to be a bit later on. So it's sort of more of a sequencing thing based on what technically sort of comes out of the Environment Act.
Okay. So I can see one more question, Susie, from Julie Battersby, which is an interesting one.
Let me scroll back up.
Yeah.
Where's?
A little bit. She was the first question.
Oh, I haven't got that one on.
I'll catch it. So what happens when the owners of a key connecting privately owned site, whose preference is to develop for housing, in brackets, do not support direct gathering of evidence to support the preservation of historically recognised wildlife corridors? As a tail there, I suspect. Are you able to answer that, Katie?
Do you mind just reading the question again, please?
Okay, so essentially it's what happens when the owners of a privately owned site do not support the gathering of evidence. So you talked about difficult land stakeholders, and I did wonder if you meant that, and then I realised you did mean that. So what do you do with a difficult stakeholder?
So there will be in the regs and guidance guidance on how to manage disputes and what role Natural England will have in any disputes. So whether we need to sort of step in and there's a process and how to help identify priorities and outcomes. In terms of the mapping, I don't know if the question is someone's land holding has been earmarked as a potential area for habitat creation or restoration, they're not happy with it. Again, my point goes back to these maps are strategic and provides an overview of where things could happen. So they won't prevent any planning going ahead or any kind of building going ahead. They're literally an indication of if a development was going to take place there. We have identified grassland creation as a suitable habitat. So maybe think about incorporating grassland creation within your development. So it's just a sort of providing those suggested ideas to help enhance development.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay, so it's 8 o'clock. I think what we'll do is move on and invite Bruce to speak, and thank Katie very much.
We did have a couple of, a question on the question and answer page as well. somebody asking, they work for a university as a land manager. Will the LNRS groups contact them, or do we have to contact? Do we contact that? Who contacts who?
I will provide my email address, and then definitely, yeah, I'll be in touch.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Bruce, are you ready to speak?
I've just, if you can hear me, I'll just share my screen. There we go. And let's go with that one. Hopefully people can see that. So you want to say, just following from Katie, who's done a really thorough introduction to what LNSs are and what they aren't. So there's a lot of detail there. So what I'd like to do is give a shorter talk, and I'm going to try and talk about how they might be relevant, how the amphibian and reptile group and the local groups might want to sort of interact with them, and things we might want to think about. So there's sort of, I loosely based it, what we do and don't know, to help prepare for LNRSs. Probably leading on from Katie's last slide is the timeline. And I think this is really important. It's something we need to think about, and it needs to be borne in mind. So as we said, they're legally in play now as of April, but we haven't got the guidelines and regulations yet. And so we're looking for trying to work out when is the sort of, when are they actually going to be rolled out. So the guidelines and regulations, talking to DEFRA recently, they are likely to come out within the next month or two, so after the last recess. And what's also really important is at it'll be the same timeline for resources. Coming to resources, if we don't get the right resources for these, then they're just not going to work. And we at Link did an estimate of what was needed, and we reckon it's about £36.5 million to set them up, and about £16.5 million annual costs across the country. When we talked to DEFRA, they didn't have that, wasn't very far off what their numbers are. And in the last spending review, DEFRA were given an uplift of £640 million to cover burdens from the Environment Act, and we're hopeful that something reasonable should come across and be given to the LNRSs. So hopefully there should be the right funding involved there, which would be really important, because without the funding, this would just fall flat. But we'll know about that again in the same period, probably in the next month or two. But a technical thing, again, there's always technical things about this, is to realise is once the regulations are out, they actually have to sit in Parliament for 40 days. That's not an issue, because that gives the responsible authorities, as or the ones that have been provisionally agreed, to actually look at them and go, yes, okay, we're happy with this, let's get on and do it. So that, my current guess at the moment is that the earliest start date for the rollout is going to be around August. And then if you think back to the slide that Katie showed with the process, a sort of fairly linear process with the steps. And the steps start by giving the habitat map, natural habitat map, and then adding local data to it. And then there's a period of widespread engagement with as many groups and stakeholders as possible. And it's going to take time to get from one to the other. But a really important thing, if we're trying to, and we are trying to engage particularly farmers and landowners beyond the usual suspects of the nature-friendly farmers, and we're trying to do that. So you can't really do that between lambing and harvest. So that we'll need to do them this winter. So if the start of the rollout is delayed much more later than August, then there will be a problem with getting them involved early on, and then that will delay everything by probably a year or so. And again, DEFRA are quite aware of this, so quite keen to make sure it's not delayed too longer. For engaging the other stakeholders and groups, and so the likes of you, the likes of local communities, and healthcare and other bits and pieces, it's much more. It's probably there's a lot more flexibility there. So you might in some LNRSs you may be engaged a bit earlier. There may be an opportunity to engage earlier, and some it'll be probably after Christmas, and some around that time. So that's the sort of time scale to bear in mind. And as Katie said, the big aim that DEFRA have is that Biodiversity Net Gain is supposed at the moment is due to be rolled out in November next year, and they want to get as many LNRSs as possible in a state where they'll be able to inform those. So as she said, not necessarily signed off or anything like necessarily, but that's the constraint at the other end. So if they delay it too far at the beginning, then everything goes out of kilter. And the other thing is, yeah, there's 50, as Kate said, 50 responsible authorities provisionally appointed. An interesting thing here, if you're in somewhere where there's a unitary authority, DEFRA have managed to persuade most of them to work in partnership with other responsible authorities. Because if you take all the unitary authorities in, then you probably have 100 or so LNRSs, which sort of seems really a bit too small and a bit fragmented. So that's a sort of timeline landscape there. But what's really important is it's called Habitat Map. It's a habitat map that's going to be produced at the end. The National Habitat Map is going to be given to the responsible authorities at the beginning. But LNRSs are more than just habitats. In fact, this comes partly out of the 5 pilots who showed that species considerations are really important, but also by pushing and sort of work from some species-specific NGOs that species are now specifically in clause 106. So the biodiversity statement and the habitat map have to describe opportunities for both habitats and species. So they're actually put there on an equal level. So this is a change since the last stage of the bill, which is something I think to be celebrated. How it's going to happen is complicated. It's still being discussed, so we don't know. That's one of our don't knows. But we do know that both DEFRA and Natural England are putting a lot of thought into it. And actually, as the Wildlife Countryside Link, we're a affiliation of 68 NGOs, and we're working with them at the moment to try and work out what's the best way to do it. It'll take a bit of time to get right, but one of the things probably from the amphibians and reptiles point of view, I think it's probably slightly simpler, because each LNRS will probably need to consider which species are a priority. And for reptiles and amphibians, birds, butterflies, plants, for example, there's probably almost certainly enough expertise, data, and knowledge locally in each of the LNRSs that the knowledge and the data is already there, and that needs to be fed in, and that should inform it from there. The problem actually comes when you're talking about, I suppose, less sexy taxa like invertebrates and bryophytes and fungi, where you don't have such a widespread network of groups, local groups around, and there's gaps in data and things like that. So that's probably where we're going to have to work hardest to try and work out how to fit species in. But as I say, from a reptiles and amphibians point of view, I suspect that on the ground, within the local areas, there's enough data and knowledge there that you don't need too much top-down guidance for that, which is a good thing. So this brings me to how can you guys be involved? I think it's about 60 local groups you've got, and you are very much what LNRS are aimed at. So in the past, I mean, we talked about biodiversity action plans. That was very much a sort of top-down approach. an authority should make a biodiversity action plan, and then they tick the boxes, and a lot of those actually then just got put on the side. The whole point about LNRS is that, as Katie said, is that they're locally produced, which means they're locally co-owned. You're putting your tuppence worth in. You're saying we want these opportunities here. These species are really important. These are how we want to do it. And by doing that, it then means there's actually a much greater chance of the opportunities being delivered. So we need you all, and we need as many people as possible taking part and being involved and putting your views forward. And as far as I can, thinking about it for the Amphibians and Reptiles group, I think there are two possible parts of the process which you might want to be thinking about. The first is data, and so this is quite early on. So if you've got local data which is not in the system, which isn't in with your local environmental record centre or something like that, which you think is important, you will need to get that to the response authority. You'll need to get in your LNRS area. It might be that the best way to do it is through the local environmental record centre, because there's a lot of, they will be playing a big part in all of this, or it might be in other ways. So that's one place where you might want to think about it. And then the other point, the part is a bit later on, which is when it comes to the engagement of everybody. Now, what's different, another thing that's really different about LNRS is it's not purely data driven, and it's going to be the data is saying this is it, this is where we should go, this is where we should do all the conservation. It's using data as a background to inform people, and then the whole idea is to get lots of people, local people, to say what they think their priorities and opportunities are, and what they think is important. So when they don't actually, won't necessarily be saying it's really important that we have in this particular pond here, we expand that and work on that and build it and link it with others. It may well be a more general thing saying that we'll actually great crested newts are a real importance in this LNRS, or slow worms or something like that. And then because the data's gone in earlier, what the LNRS process does, it takes the opportunities and prioritizes them, and then it maps them afterwards. So I think, a really important place here, particularly for your local groups, will be to say, these are the species I think are really important. These are the species we need to be thinking about in this LNRS area, and you need to advocate for them. If you don't, and no one else does, then they'll get left out. And I think it's really important that experts like you are thought, and back groups and butterfly groups and all that are thought of as a stakeholder group in your own right. You are, because if you don't say then, if it's just left to nothing, the experience from the pilots is you will get wildflowers for pollinators, you'll get lots of trees as opportunities, and you'll get beavers would be a nice thing to put in, unless you're farmers. So we need to make sure that there's as wide a range of opportunities and species are thought about and involved. And I think a really crucial place for the ARG local groups will be simply advocacy, to say, please don't forget these are the species we need. You may decide to do all reptiles and amphibians in your area, or you may on discussion say that we've got there's 3 or 4 species which are much more important, that they're the higher priority. But that is totally up to you. But those are the sorts of questions and things you should start thinking about. How are you going to interact? So I think I've probably taken up my time now, and I'm going to leave it at that.
Okay, thank you, Bruce. That's fantastic. That's really good. We do have Mike, in fact, who's going to do that very job for us in a minute. for Sefton Coast, and he's going to argue passionately for their species. Have we just got a few questions, Susie?
Yes, we have. One that really stood out was there is obviously loads of money being made available for this scheme, which relies heavily on the provision of data from all the various local volunteer species groups. What mechanism has been provisioned to support these local species groups financially in their ongoing efforts to gather data, which in many cases is carried out by volunteers from their own pockets? Too often schemes bypass this element, and much of the funding ends up going into the writing of documents, and we'll just scroll down, and providing the outcomes, e.g. more tree planting.
Yeah, that's a very important question. I fear government probably don't take that into account so much. There have been some work saying how much those indirect costs, because these are not direct costs to government, these are indirect costs to government, and it is a huge amount of money and time that goes into this data collection. I fear if you actually took the proper numbers and included that, you are inflating the costs probably tenfold. So they're not going to pay for all the local data that's gathered. The other thing is that is to bear in mind that this is going to be an ongoing process, but we want to start soon. We can't wait until we've identified all the data gaps and collected everything. So we need to be going with what we've got now. But what was hopeful and is already shown in some of the pilots is that there have, and particularly in Cumbria, for example, they've shown where there are data gaps. And if we've got those data gaps and sort of identified as opportunities and priorities in the LNRS strategy, that should be an opportunity for where funding then goes into it. And so remember that LNRSs are a strategy. They're not actually delivering the opportunities, but the things like net gain and other funding opportunities will be guided by the LNRSs as to where they go. And a further thing to think about, which we need to sort of bottom out, we haven't bottomed out yet, is monitoring, because to show how successful they are or not, we need monitoring as we go along, and these things are reviewed every 5 years. So there will need to be money going in for that, which again is another way of collecting data. So short answer is it's not there at the moment. Hopefully they might get something, but I fully understand the huge contribution that's there. I'll stop share.
Okay, so one more, Susie.
Yeah. The comment, right, would it be possible for us ARGs to advise the areas we don't know that we have gaps that then can be funded for surveys? Oh, exactly what you've just said. I was just reading it as I was going down, sorry. So yeah, that's been covered. And there was also one, will LNRS essentially replace current BAP habitats and species? And I think that was covered as well previously. That's all I've got on there.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you, Susie. Thank you, Bruce. All right, now we are going to hear from one of our very passionate ARGs, which is North Merseyside Amphibian and Reptile Group. And Mike is going to set out the situation on the ground on the Sefton coast. And then hopefully that can sort of provide a bit of a case study that we can think about. So Mike, are you there? Can you share? Fabulous. Off you go, Mike.
Right. Okie doke. First of all, I apologise. I've just realised I haven't actually put in a map to show people where I'm talking about, but basically it's a Sefton coast, which is from Liverpool up to Southport, and that's part of North Merseyside, which in turn comes under the Liverpool City region. How do I switch to the next slide?
Have you tried your arrow key?
I'll try the other one.
I use the mouse wheel when I do it. We were doing so well, weren't we, Mike?
Right. On the Sefton coast, we've got various species of reptiles and amphibians. Some are much commoner than others. The natterjack toad is a rare protected UK species, and the Sefton coast is a very important stronghold for the natterjack toad. We actually have about 40% of the UK population of natterjack toads on the Sefton coast. The common toad is very widespread on the Sefton coast. It's a declining species in UK generally, but on the Sefton coast it's really numerous. And ironically enough, it actually competes with the natterjack toad in many situations. The common frog is widespread and common all over Merseyside. In fact, it's probably our commonest species. The great crested newt, obviously it's a protected species in the UK and it's declining. On the Sefton coast, it's common in parts of the coastline, mainly the Ainsdale coast. It's considered to be introduced actually over most of the Sefton coast, and it's spread from the original introduction in the Ainsdale area. And the great crested newt also actually competes with natterjack toads as well, because it preys on the tadpoles. So we've got this rather ironic situation where two species, great crested newt and common toad, although they're generally important species in the country, they actually compete quite a lot with the natterjack toad, which is one of our specialities. The smooth newt is widespread and also a very common species on the Sefton coast, as it is generally in UK. The reptiles, we've only actually got 3 reptiles on the Sefton coast. We've got no snakes at all. We've only got the 3 species of lizard. The sand lizard is the one that's really rare, and I'll say a lot more about sand lizards in a minute, but that's one of the key species concerned about. Common lizard is commoner on the Sefton coast than the sand lizard, but in Merseyside it's actually largely restricted to the Sefton coast. It's not a common species or a widespread species in Merseyside as a whole, but it is fairly common and widespread on the Sefton coast. And largely the slow worm, which strangely enough is actually very rare on the Sefton coast. It only occurs on mainly along railway embankments around Southport and a few other places. But obviously the slow worms are widespread species in the UK anyway, so we're not concerned about that species. And the natterjack toad, as I say, the Sefton coast holds about 40% of the British natterjack population. The population is estimated to be about 1,200. It's not a huge population, I suppose, but that's what it's estimated to be. It's about 1,200 adults. But there has been as well a declining trend in natterjack population over the last 30 years. Over the last 30 years at least. The requirements of natterjack toads, they're quite fussy animals. They really breed best in shallow, unshaded pools with little or no vegetation, like the pool you see on the right there. They don't like deep pools because deep pools are cold. They like warm, shallow water where the tadpoles will develop quickly, and metamorphosis takes a lesser amount of time than it does with the common amphibian species. Vegetation is not a good thing because, apart from the fact it probably interferes with the pool heating up, it also encourages predators as well. And common toads like to breed in ponds with vegetation as well. And common toad is one of the competitors of natterjack toad. Breeding pools obviously need to retain some water until the tadpoles metamorphose, which they do fairly quickly. They're out often metamorphosized by June. Late in April, they can be out by June. But they do need to obviously to retain water, and although they're shallow, they need to retain water for that period of time. But it's best if they dry out afterwards, because then that discourages predators. So what we're looking at for ideal natterjack breeding ponds is these shallow pools. Oh, sorry, down the wrong way. Right, the terrestrial requirements of natterjack toads. When they're not breeding in the pools, they like sandy, soil or sand to burrow into. They live in burrows basically, and they obviously need soft soil to burrow into. They live in burrows in the daytime, and they come out at night to hunt for food and to breed. For foraging, they need very short vegetation or bare sand. This is something that's quite important on the Sefton coast, because a lot of the slats are getting really overgrown with creeping willow and various other vegetation, and it's not the sort of thing natterjacks like to forage on in. They because they run, they don't hop, they just run along after their food, so they like really sort of short bare areas. They will actually forage on the beach as well. Sorry, going the wrong way again. So the causes of declines of natterjacks, breeding ponds becoming overgrown with vegetation, as I've mentioned before, which is much more attractive to common amphibians like common toad than natterjacks, and then they outcompete the natterjacks. Another problem is the breeding ponds drying up. We've had a lot of quite dry springs in the last 20 years. April's particularly been very dry, and some ponds will start off full of water, then they'll dry up before the tadpoles can metamorphose. Can't do anything about the weather, obviously, but that's something to be borne in mind with future planning. Disturbance of breeding pools is another problem, especially by dogs, irresponsible dog walkers, and by the public generally, by kids getting into the pools and disturbing the tadpoles. The dogs also, because a lot of dogs are treated with flea repellent or some sort of insecticide. It's been proved in some instances that this insecticide has been getting into the water and in the breeding pools for natterjacks when the dogs have been romping in them. So that's another reason for keeping dogs out. So a lot of the pools are fenced now. I mean, we try and, or the local authorities try and fence the pools to keep public and dogs out, at least during the breeding season for the natterjacks. Because all the land on the Sefton coast is actually public access, so we can't keep the public or their dogs out generally. You've just got to keep them out of specific areas. The loss of terrestrial habitat through growth of rank vegetation, like this picture below at Hightown. I mean, this isn't suitable terrestrial habitat for natterjacks at all, because it's just so full of rank vegetation, tall grasses, brambles, creeping willow and whatnot, and bushes and trees. That's not the sort of thing not the sort of habitat that natterjacks like to forage in, and this can be really restrictive in their range. We've also lost a lot of wind-blown sand that used to, in the past, a lot of the inner dunes as well as the outer dunes had a lot more free sand than they do now. This is something I'll come on to more with sandlessers as well. There's generally a loss of dune dynamics, the wind-blown sand on the Sefton coast blowing over the more fixed dunes that we used to have. Sorry. Okay. The sand lizard, it's not only important because it's a rare species anyway, but the Merseyside has its own genetically distinct race of sound lizard, the dune race sound lizard. This is proven to be genetically distinct from the sound lizards that occur in the south of England. There are sound lizards native in Dorset and Hampshire and Surrey in bigger numbers than they are in Merseyside. Our sound lizards have seriously declined during the last 100 years, and there's now estimated to be no more than 500 adults, which is, you can imagine, it's not very many. It's impossible to accurately work out the numbers of sound lizards. It's just a creature that's impossible to accurately work out numbers, but it's a very good estimate by experienced observers that it's about population at most is about 500 adults at present on the Sefton coast, and it's still declining as well. Sound lizards mostly inhabit the frontal dunes of the Sefton coast. That's their favoured habitat generally, but previously they were more widespread on the fixed dunes further inland as well, but they've declined a lot on the fixed dunes, mainly, well, for two reasons, mainly because of scrub invasion and also loss of bare sand. Nowadays, the inner dunes have very little bare sand. It's only around blowouts and where it's been artificially created. There are also some sand lizards on the adjacent railway verges along the Southport to Liverpool railway line, and on some of the golf courses. There are at least historic records of sound lizards on some of the adjacent golf courses, which basically is dune habitat anyway, which has just been converted to golf courses. They're just about hanging on 1 and 2 golf courses, we think, but they're not as many on the golf courses now as they used to be. Another problem is habitat, is fragmentation of the colonies of sound lizards we've got on the Sefton coast, particularly the inland dune sites. A lot of the colonies are becoming increasingly fragmented, and that causes problems in itself with interbreeding. Just a little bit more about our race of sound lizard. You can see various pictures here of different sound lizards. The one on the top right is the female, one of the females. The other 3 at the bottom are males. You see how much they vary, even though there are distinct differences because they're genetically different from the ones down south. There are actually differences in appearance, but it's you can only talk in general terms that they tend to be less well marked than the southern animals, and they're also they tend to have a lot more of the males have more of a lime green color rather than the males sound lizards down south have darker, sort of more bluey green on the flanks, but as I say, they're less heavily marked than southern animals generally. They are a little bit distinct, but the ones down south actually occupy a different habitat really. The ones down south live on sandy heathland, whereas our sound lizards live in natural sand dunes rather than sandy heathland, generally speaking. So probably the difference in appearance relates to the different habitats that they occupy. Like all sound lizards, the males really go, the best appearance is in the spring after their first slough, when it's the mating season, the breeding season. That's when they're the brightest green along the flanks. When you see them, even the males at other times of year, they don't tend to be quite as bright. So these pictures were taken in the sort of best period of the year for them. Sound lizard habitat requirements. As I was saying, the sort of the best habitat really is the frontal dunes, not necessarily the very embryo dunes, but the basic frontal dune system, which is varying width in Merseyside on the Sefton coast. In some places it's fairly wide, in other places it's really narrow, and it drops down onto fixed dune in a short distance going inland. So the habitat, even the prime habitat, is quite restricted really. That picture on the left at the bottom shows the sort of ideal optimum sort of habitat with thick tussocky marrum combined with patches of bare sand. The sand lizards have to have bare patches of bare sand to lay their eggs in. They lay eggs. They're not live bearers like common lizards. They lay eggs, so they have to have sand as a substrate to lay their eggs in. So that's one of their fundamental requirements, is bare sand. Not necessarily big swathes of it, just patches of it. Fine, and that always has to be on a slope as well. They only occur on slopes. They don't occur on flat land, sand lizards. They like particularly areas with south-facing slopes that get the full sun. But it's always handy if there's some east and west-facing slopes as well, so they can get the morning and evening sun as well. And of course, they don't want shade from trees or shrub. Ideal habitat is very little shade at all. So the causes of the sand lizard decline on the Sefton coast, one of the big causes is scrub and tree invasion, especially sea buckthorn and Japanese rose, neither of which are native on the Sefton coast. And Japanese rose is an alien species altogether. The picture on the right at the bottom shows Japanese rose rapid invasion of what was a good sand lizard slope, and the bigger picture on the left shows a big area of sea buckthorn, which has invaded an area of fixed dune. This is the kind of thing that we're contending with a lot, with causing loss of habitats for natterjack toads as well as sand lizards. There has been big areas of sea buckthorn invasion and Japanese rose invasion. Some of it's now been reduced because we have had some projects running recently, gems in the dunes, and then dynamic dunescapes, which is helping to reduce some of the scrub problem. But these projects are only short term. Even the dynamic dunescapes, which is running currently, I think finishes next year. So there's a big concern about what's going to happen in the future in terms of trying to maintain habitat and create new habitat for sand lizards and natterjack toads. Another problem has been loss of bare sand, the essential bare sand, particularly in the areas of fixed dune. The loss of bare sand has been quite phenomenal, with the coast becoming much less dynamic, much less blowing sand from the frontals, and the increased the effect of this is increasingly fragmented populations, leading to the effects of inbreeding, as I've mentioned before. We've also faced a number of fires. Fires can be a big problem. There's not always adequate fire breaks in some of the dunes, and there was a disastrous fire back in 2013 which swept over more than a mile of habitat in Raven Mells and Cabin Hill, and just completely destroyed the whole habitat and most of the sand lizards along with it. Hasn't fortunately been in fires as serious as that since then, but we don't want them either. They can be absolutely catastrophic, and this time of year is very critical with everywhere being so dry at the moment. Spring and early summer can be very bad for fires. Ironically, on the other hand, we have had a number of quite a succession of poor summer weather as well. Since 2007, we've had quite a number of very poor summers on the run in periods, and that can seriously affect breeding of sand lizards, because they lay their eggs in the sand. They're then dependent on the heat of the sun to heat the sand up and hatch the eggs. And if you get a bad summer with a lot of rain and cloud, then the eggs either don't hatch at all or they hatch very late. That's something we can do nothing about, but that is something that does affect sand lizard numbers quite dramatically when you get a run of bad summers, succession of bad summers together, which has happened a few times recently. There's also increased predation, especially cats. Some of the colonies of sand lizards are quite close to housing estates, and then we get problems with predation of cats. And also pheasants are a big problem on the dunes as well. There's a lot of pheasants that have escaped from introductions inland of pheasants for shooting, and pheasants are actually quite common on the dunes and quite a problem as well. So measures that need to be taken to prevent this decline in numbers of both our natterjack toads and sand lizards, and hopefully even to reverse the trend in the future and maybe help these animals to increase again. One of the major measures one of the most important measures that can be taken is remobilisation of the bare sand. As I mentioned before, by cutting through the frontal ridge with these like diggers, then the sand gets mobilised, and then the idea is it then will start to blow around again, and it'll blow around onto the more inner dunes and start to create more bare sand on the inner dunes. It may bury some of the vegetation we don't want as well, hopefully not the lizards or the toads, but it certainly will help to increase the amount of bare sand on the inner dunes where it's really needed. This has already been started by the Dynamic Dunescapes project and by the National Trust at Formby, where you see that picture there was taken. It's a process that's going on many sand dunes around the country now, this mobilisation, remobilisation of sand, cutting notches, what we call notches through the frontal dunes, just sort of slits, and just to allow the wind to get through and whip up the sand and then spread it across the inland areas. Another thing that needs doing is creation of a lot more natterjack breeding pools. We have got breeding pools for natterjack scattered all up the coastline. Some of them have been, or most of them have been artificially created by digging with excavators and occasionally by hand, mostly by excavators. But these pools, even if they're kept clear of, if they're weeded now and again, the aquatic weeds pull out, they tend to lose their effectiveness after a time. They don't tend to be as good for natterjacks after a while. They tend to silt up, or they dry up, or they just get swamped in vegetation. They get full of predators. So it needs really continual creation of a certain number of fresh breeding ponds every year to provide ideal conditions for natterjack breeding all along the coast. And these pools, on top of the fact that we need fresh pools anyway, we need them dug at different depths, because every year the water table is different. The previous winter to the last one just gone, the water table was extremely high. Some of the ponds were very deep, and they were too deep to be very good for natterjack tadpole development metamorphosis, because they were too cold, too deep. So well, at least the process of metamorphosis gets delayed, and that causes more problems with predation, and it causes more problems with common toads that like deeper ponds as well, that compete with the natterjack. So we don't want the ponds to be too deep. So we need some ponds that are dug deeper. So they're there if the water table is really low in a particular year, there's still water in them. But we want other ponds that are actually quite shallow, so that if the water table's high, then there'll still be something there, but it won't be too deep. Also, another thing is, by digging fresh natterjack pools, it's at the same time the sand dug out of the pools helps to create good conditions for sand lizards by being thrown up onto a south-facing bank. We've had this happen on a number of occasions. We've found new colonies of sand lizards that have colonised the areas adjacent to the natterjack ponds, because they've wandered around and found a fresh, nice sandy bank. So that's a useful byproduct as well of the natterjack pools. But basically, we need more pools for natterjacks all over the coast, really. I mean, by having more pools in different places, it increases the spread of the natterjacks as well, and increases their distribution within the Sefton coast. Another thing I mentioned before is removal of trees, scrub and general rank vegetation. I said before, it's a big problem in many areas of the Sefton coast. Big areas of sea buckthorn and Japanese rose, which rapidly spread as well, and also poplar, which is seriously restricting a suitable habitat for sound lizards and natterjacks. Japanese rose is best removed by digging it up and burying it. You can't just cut it down. And this is what Gems in the Dunes, the project has just recently finished, back from the Brink project, Gems in the Dunes. They spent quite a bit of money getting contractors in to remove Japanese rose in certain areas, but that project's now finished. The Dynamic Dunescapes are doing a similar thing. That project will also finish next year. So there's a desperate need for more removal of scrub in the future, because if it's not kept down and removed, it'll rapidly invade areas even where, you know, it's consequently being removed, and there's more areas to remove anyway. Sea buckthorn and poplar can be cut down with chainsaws, but it needs contractors really, at least. It's more than, we have a band of merry volunteers that go out cutting down buckthorn and poplar by hand with hand tools, but it's beyond the scope of hand tools to cut down the bigger expanses of sea buckthorn and poplar. So it needs to be done with contractors with chainsaws, removed mechanically, or else dug out with a digger. All trees need to be removed really from areas with sound lizard colonies to prevent shade, ideally. Doesn't always practical because sometimes the public are very much against removing trees, but we try and get them removed as far as we can, because obviously we don't want shade in sound lizard areas, or in natterjack areas for that matter. And also trees act as perches for predatory birds, particularly corvids like crows and magpies, and if they sit in a tree they can easily spot a lizard running around underneath. That's another reason to try and get rid of trees when we can from the sound lizard areas. Another thing that we need to be doing and continue doing is the creation of sand patches. Apart from the general dune mobilisation, we need to be creating sand patches in areas where we can't do general dune mobilisation. I mean, dune mobilisation only works where you've got a nice frontal ridge with a nice sort of a height of sand to then be dug into, and then the wind will blow it inland. But some of our dune systems now got salt marsh developing in front of the outer dunes, so mobilisation is not going to work there, like in the Birkdale dunes, for instance. So we have to get sand patches dug, or try to, for sounders, as I was saying, it's essential for their egg laying. Sometimes we can get machines in, as you can see there, to dig sand patches, which is the ideal thing really for larger sand patches, because digging them by hand is a big task, as you can imagine, especially if we've got to hack through the vegetation to start with. But we do a certain amount of sand patching by hand as well, as you can see there. You can see the picture on the bottom is an ideally created hand dug sand patch, about 2 meters square. They need to be at least about 2 meters square. And on a slope, nice fresh sand. They're always dug around May time, late April to the end of May, and then they're ready for the sounders to hopefully utilise that year.
In connecting habitats to improve the condition of habitats, but also to allow movement of species across the landscape. So this kind of if we could have this kind of information and data from local experts highlighting where the habitat improvements need to be take place to allow that linkage, then that's the data, that's what we want to see, and the LNRS in terms of making sort of bigger, better, and more connected habitats. So I hope that's sort of answered your question.
Can I just like to say, sort of draw a bit more on that? So Katie said it's connectivity is LNRS is supposed to will be the backbone of the connectivity across the nature recovery network. So without connectivity, LNRSs won't work. But I think this also highlights a slightly different thing in the importance of species and taking their needs into account. Because if you're just doing purely habitats, you may go for you may get rid of some of the sort of invasive plants, but you may still have quite a grassy. Go with grassy dunes, which is obviously not very good for both those species, natterjacks and the sand lizards. So this is why species do and are going to be needed to be sort of taken into account. And in this case, I think it's quite tailored specific stuff. So make sure you go to your responsible authority and when it comes around to it, and say that these are national priority species, because that you can probably use as a bit of a lever, because we don't know what the guidelines are going to be, but there will be probably a core list of national priorities that are taken into account that have to be considered by the LNRSs. So you could actually probably use that as strong evidence as well, and sort of to back you up. But you've got all the data, you know what needs to be done. Take that and put that forward as an opportunity would be my suggestion.
Can you pick out some more questions? There's hundreds. We haven't got out.
Yeah, I know. They were flying in, and I was thinking I can't keep up. Let me just work my way down. I think I've gone too far there, too far back. Just a second. Katie did put on that they're having a workshop locally in that area. Natural England are holding a local species workshop event, so details of that will be sent out. And then, Bruce actually answered this on the chat. Can a LNRS have a species that is currently absent as a priority, and reintroductions and or adaptation to climate change? And he's put yes. So that one came. And then we've had some one here. I feel a little cynical, but is this just going to be a new way of watching biodiversity decline? As this presentation is showing, which is what Mike was showing us, we know where the species of interest exist and why they're declining. And, you know, this is happening in a well-protected habitat. Sorry. It's just, it keeps flicking to the end where new ones have come up. In a protected habitat. I can't see the bottom of it. What is needed is money. Can we scroll down? And willpower to actually address biodiversity decline. And a few have supported that comment. If anyone would like to address that.
Can I go with that first, Katie?
What was the comment? Sorry, I'm just trying to keep track of I was just running through the questions.
Sorry, Katie. So it was a few, quite a bit of support for this one. That they feel, you know, a little cynical that it's just going to be a new way of watching biodiversity actually decline, as this presentation showed that, you know, Mike showed, we know where the species of interest exist and why they're declining. And this is happening in a well-protected habitat. And what's needed is money and the willpower to actually, you know, address this.
Sure.
So they're just skeptical about the process.
I think the LNRS is a different process to previous strategies for nature conservation, because I think previous strategies has what we call involved in the usual suspects, such as the NGOs, conservation bodies, Natural England, Environment Agency. But these LNRSs are all about engaging with the local experts and the local people on the ground who are doing the data and monitoring, who have the knowledge in the local area, and to build in that knowledge into the strategy. And then by producing this strategy that everyone has contributed to and to agree the priorities, then hopefully we can use that to persuade sort of the big developers or big volunteers with the money to implement where we've suggested habitat creation and improvements should be made. So I understand that there's been a lot of strategies for biodiversity and nature in the past, and maybe some of them have sort of sat on a shelf, haven't really done much. But I think this is a new in terms of being locally led, developed in collaboration with a wide range of partners, and then everyone just having that input and to, you know, an opportunity to make some real improvements for nature's recovery. So,
yeah, I think. The important thing is the question said, the person who wrote the question said, we know where all the sites are, we know what needs to be done. But the distinction is at the local level, you know where the sites are and you know what needs to be done. A lot of previous conservation stuff, perhaps, I think has come from the top down. And when you look at national maps, national data, they don't have all of that in there. Nationally, we don't know where all the local sites are and what needs to be done. So that's the big difference. So it would be building up from the bottom. So we're making sure that they are taken account of, making sure they're in there. I think that's a really crucial difference with these. And then once we've got these priorities and opportunities, so if the sands are a priority and they become a priority in the LNRS, there will be a certain number of priorities and opportunities within the area. And if a developer then gives in some money for net gain, or people want to, or other money goes in, it can't go anywhere. It will be channeled into where the actual action needs to be done. So hopefully, one of the things about the LNRS is it'll be a way of directing funding where it needs to go, rather than just being done on an ad hoc scope.
Thank you. Thank you. What happens when local species groups argue about what is needed for the quite small areas of good quality habitats? For example, removing trees for butterflies versus adding and coppicing trees for dormice. We don't all agree, so is it the loudest voices often win? So who resolves these disputes?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in the pilots, they demonstrated that there were obviously conflicting issues in terms of what some people perceived as a priority in terms of different habitats. So the pilots did come up with a matrix to try and sort of score and help prioritize important habitats and for species creation. But that's what we're hoping, that the regulations and guidance that DEFRA are currently writing will provide some clarity on how to resolve disputes. I think because it's a collaborative process, there will have to be sort of working together to agree and prioritise the outcomes and measures and which habitats and species are a priority.
Yeah, I think the nub of it there is the working together and just getting people around the table to understand and talk to each other. And there will be clashes, and not everybody is going to win everything. So there's going to have to be compromises. But if you can see why you've compromised in one place to get something somewhere else, then hopefully there'll be more of an understanding of what's going on, and then potentially get on and get the work done.
So one here that's just come through, it's about, contact. So how do people get their voices heard? So is that through, the local recording offices, etc.? Who should we report to? Will there be local consultations? And yeah, that's carried on as well into the next question.
So I think it's really important that if you have local data, then to contact so your major your record centre or your local amphibian and reptile group, because without this data, then we can't make this LNRS happen. So that's sort of the first suggestion. And then in terms of engagement and consultation, so Natural England will be working with a responsible authority. So we're trying to kind of collate and highlight all the key partners that need to be involved in the LNRS. But I will provide my email address. So if there's anyone specifically interested in LNRS or how they can be involved, then yeah, please let me know. But there will be a series of workshops, either face-to-face or online, to help bring these people sort of volunteer groups around the table to discuss what's important for you for nature recovery, which habitats and species are you interested in, where do you want to see the change, what do you want to see happen. So please, yeah, all I can say is contact your local data recorders or data groups, because we really need this information to help develop the LNRS.
Thank you. Can I just say, because Cumbria was obviously a pilot county, and my screen, I lost connection when you were talking about Cumbria, so I don't know if it's been covered, but our recording centre has been very open. We've been involved in workshops, and you know, we've had a meeting just last night talking about records and being involved. So it is, you know, for us, it's our local record centre, and there's a lot of communication going on. So I think that's very much key, being involved with your county records, or whichever groups, you know, looking after. What else have we got?
Okay, I think we've run over a little bit, so we just
Okay.
have, I think there's one more question from Helen. I think the main thing is actually, I'm just thinking about this, is how we can take things forward from here. So maybe that's would be where I would like to say, what are the next steps? Are we going to local record centre? Should we be looking for workshops? Where should we be looking for workshops? So what is our kind of roadmap now for engaging with LNRS scheme? That's my question to Katie and Bruce.
So in terms of future communication, I think if I could provide regular updates to this group, that would be really helpful. And then maybe that would be the most effective way to disseminate the information on the updates for local nature recovery strategies. Obviously, I'm from the Cheshire to Lancashire team. So I'm kind of more of a local contact, but I could provide your details to my national LNRS contact, who would then provide kind of more of an overview of how to be involved with the local nature recovery strategies as they go forward. And then we are hoping that the responsible authorities will then set up their own LNRS mailbox, and then that way they can sort of regularly send out invites to partners and different stakeholders to make them aware of the different workshops and engagement events that are going to take place as the LNRS develops.
So from the data point of view, I think the local environmental record centres are going to be very important. And the the Cumbria Biodiversity, can't remember what their four initials stand for, who've did a lot of work with the Cumbria pilot, have been very good. Greater Manchester, they did a lot of really good work. But they helped us, and we did a workshop for all the other local environmental record centres on Monday this week. So they're all prepared for it, they all know. So if you've got data and you can get it to them, I think that would probably be the easiest from that point of view. When it comes to general engagement, the LNRS is all going to go at different speeds, because some have a lot of data and are ready to go. So Kent, Gloucestershire, Dorset are going to be out the starting blocks really, really quickly. Others are going to take a lot more time because they've got a much lower place to start from. So, as Katie said, responsible authorities should be, when the time is coming, advertising and actually reaching out to people and for the workshops and advertising their workshops. There should be, ideally, they should have a web page or something on there to with all these dates and things. And all the pilots had web pages which were easily accessible and actually told you what was going on. So that's a model that should work. So hopefully we'll hear. But Katie will be a very good one to keep informed as well through the NE.
Okay, well, I'll continue to keep my ear to the ground, obviously. We have the Hurt Workers meeting coming up in June. I've been asked by ARG to invite either yourself or Katie to speak at that. It seems like August is a critical time, next critical time. So perhaps what we could do is ask for an update, late August, early September, maybe, I don't know if that'd be good timing.
We'll certainly know the regulations and things, guidelines. We should certainly
Okay.
know a lot more by then.
Yeah, agree.
Well, let's aim for that then from the ARG UK perspective. And obviously, if we get any news, we pass it on to our groups. But as I said from the beginning, it's such a new process. I wanted to hear it from Natural England and Wildlife and Countryside Link directly rather than trying to paraphrase it, mangle it to myself. So I'm really, really grateful that both of you have given up your evening, and also Mike and Susie from the ARGs to present their viewpoint. Susie, do we have one last thing to say?
Thank you. What else? Yes, thank you all, very useful. Thanks all speakers, and fascinating, really interesting, thanks. So yeah, many thanks thank you. Yeah, they're coming through, everyone's saying thank you. Really interesting, very informative.
Brilliant.
Wonderful.
Okay. Well, on that basis, I think we can all get on with our evening. So I'm going to show my end slide, which is, funnily enough, the North Merseyside Amphibian Reptile Group clearing spot for sand lizards and natterjacks. Massive thank you to all our speakers. Thank you for everybody for attending and engaging and really being so interested. I think this is really, really important for amphibian and reptile conservation across the UK, but also for our group. So we'll look forward to the next update, and say good night to you all. Thank you. Good night. Bye.